I thought I'd start off with a couple of words about who Hyde Advisory is, so you know who's up here talking and why I'm up here talking to you, and then we'll get into a bit of the meat and potatoes about M&A. So Hyde Advisory, really the background is 12 years experience advising clients in the cannabis sector, starting off in Canada. We work with over 500 of the 900 licensed producers there on licensing and other advisory services. About 36 countries now we've worked in on advisory and M&A mandates over the last 12 years. We have about 70 illegal cannabis business listings on our website in our roster who we represent in terms of the M&A side of the house. About 100 cannabis sector buyers, investors in our database. And we closed a dozen deals in the last year, which might not sound like a lot, but every deal is one they're all tough to close in the cannabis sector these days, so we're actually pretty proud of that stat. I'm not going to go through these items. This slide deck is going to be made available to people afterwards, so there's a little bit about how we do business. I'm not going to waste the time to talk about that. Really, where we focus in this business is helping people to sell their business or merge their business with another company that makes sense. We help people to buy into the cannabis industry, whether it's someone from in the industry or outside the industry. We help people with what I call strategic investment. This is mainly when it's a cannabis company or someone that's involved in the industry that sees a synergistic benefit from investing in another cannabis company. Let's just say, for example, it was to secure a preferred supplier deal and to make sure that you were the only one that would supply to that distributor. You might invest a bit of money in that distributor, and now there's a tight relationship. We also work on supply chain management in respect of some of the more tricky markets to navigate into, given our reach and our experience. That's kind of some of the countries that we've worked in over the last 12 years. Again, this will be provided to you after. I'm part of an ecosystem of companies, having done consulting many years. We do licensing. We have a market space where we buy and sell used equipment globally as well. And Cannabis Global Consultants, or CGC, is our global one-stop shop for startup licenses globally. So again, we're fairly active in the industry. I'm here to talk about M&A today, and that's most of the work that I do. So global cannabis M&A, when you think about it, there's really two ways to kind of grow a business, if you will, broadly speaking. One is organically. We're talking there about increasing revenues, increasing sales, reducing costs. That's one way to grow the business. The other way, or borrowing money to expand. The other way is through M&A. That's when you buy in a business, you merge, or you buy something into the business, or you join forces with another company. So it's the M&A side that is really what we're focused on. And also keep in mind that many entrepreneurs, the focus really is on getting to an exit. So again, an important part of M&A is thinking about how you get your business to the most valuable point that it can possibly be at the time you want to make that exit. So what's the outlook on cannabis M&A globally? What we're seeing is the capital markets remain very, very constrained. There are very few equity investors and partners out there, particularly in Europe. We're seeing a very slight loosening in Canada and the US, but Europe is still very tight. Why is that? Spectacular failures of the large public cannabis companies. We can thank the US and Canada for that, unfortunately. We've also had frauds like Juicy Fields, inaccurate projections in investor decks, slower than expected growth in global markets. These have all served to really kind of undermine investor confidence, if you will. And there's also lots of competition for capital now. I get sent probably 20 investor decks a week, and I'm trying to look through those and pick out the unicorn or the ones that really make sense. And there's just lots and lots of companies all looking for capital. What are some of the positives, though? We are seeing a bit of new capital trickling in. I believe that's going to increase, largely due to recent developments here in Germany, which is obviously a great landmark step that was taken after lots of discussion. We're seeing some of the knock-on effects in other markets like Poland, other countries. Earlier, there's about France and Italy. There's lots more gathering momentum now, which I think helps investor confidence. And we're also seeing some of the US rescheduling discussions as well, obviously help to spur that on. Much of the available capital is from outside of Europe. So you think about the US and Canadian, Switzerland, possibly these kind of places. So again, as you think about M&A, you're thinking about attracting those folks into your business, not just about European investment into European companies. What deals are getting done out there in cannabis? Most of the M&A deals involve other cannabis companies rather than outside capital. That's quite typical. I'm not talking about early seed investment. I'm talking here about M&A deals, buying and selling. It really is a buyer's market. Deals are often opportunistic and tangibly benefit the acquirer or investor. They're handpicking what they need and what they want in these deals. A good example is Curaleaf's purchase of Northern Green, a Canadian EU GMP holder. They did that because they have a lot of flower aggregating export out of Canada. They also, Northern Green was also handling their products. So I think to them, they realized that they better maybe buy that company before somebody else did, and it would affect their continuity or supply chain. So there's lots of reasons why M&A can be a good idea with a certain partner at a certain time. We look at in Europe, Samai's recent acquisitions, such as Hologen in Portugal, handpicking a cultivation asset because, of course, they're an extractor and a formulator. So having cultivation does help their bottom line as well. Also, what we're seeing is liquidation deals, right? Many M&A deals being fueled by a current or impending liquidity crisis. And we've seen some of these deals in Europe, and we've certainly seen a lot in the states in the US that are saturated, as well as in Canada. I gave an example to some friends I was talking to earlier, where there's a greenhouse. CanTrust was one of the early LPs in Canada. They spent $217 million building out a 1 million square foot greenhouse and large processing building, and they sold it for $20 million about a month ago. So 10 cents on the dollar, if you will. So not a very good deal. I want to highlight a few key areas, and there's not enough time to really delve into all the facets of M&A, but I think this will kind of whet your appetite and give you some of the high points of things that you ought to be thinking about and people ought to think about as they navigate M&A in the cannabis space, whether on the buying or the selling or investing end of it. Valuations being, I think, probably the most important thing. A major difference between North America and Europe in the M&A field is valuations in cannabis. US and Canadian M&A partners don't buy into what they believe are the bloated valuations of many cannabis companies in the EU. If we use Germany as an example, most of the top public cannabis companies in Germany are valued in and around the 10x of projected annualized revenue. Those numbers are a pipe dream in many other markets in North America, etc., where our valuations are probably 2x of annualized revenue if you're lucky, and sometimes it can be less than that. So there's a very big difference. If you are a European cannabis company looking for capital, you're not going to get a lot of interest from more savvy investors at a 10x valuation. So it's really about thinking about setting the right valuation going in. Timing is a big thing in M&A. You must be able to, fund the business for up to a year. When you think about, well, maybe now's the time to enter into an M&A mode, you can't do that thinking it's going to happen in 3 months, 6 months. It's very common that it takes 6 months. It can take a year. You can have a few false runs. A deal that goes right near the end, something goes wrong. It happens more than people realize. Waiting until your back's against the wall financially is obviously a very bad thing to do. And if you wait too long, your options become very reduced. Buyers and investors can smell blood in the water. They know if there's distress in the air, and they immediately are knocking your value down to a ridiculously low number. So the last thing you want to do is be going out to the market for M&A when there's the financial kind of crunch nipping you at the heels. You can't maybe pay your creditors, or you've got other issues. The time to look at M&A was 6 months prior, was earlier than that. Approaching M&A and investment from a position of strength, right, maximizes the value. So really, again, you need that time to get the deal done. What mistakes are we seeing out there? You know, one of the biggest mistakes is the investor deck. When you think about it, the investor deck is really the main exhibit, if you will, that investors are going to gauge your company on. The quality of it, what's inside there, the story it tells, what jumps off the page. And unfortunately, the decks that we see are, you know, quite often substandard across a range of items. I've probably seen 5 good investor decks, maybe 10, and I've probably reviewed 400 or 500 maybe. And I'm not saying they were all terrible. I'm just saying they all had a lot of room for improvement in our opinion. Common pitfalls including, you know, exaggerating the market size, quoting that, you know, there's often trotted out numbers that if everything went the way that we all wanted it to and the black market all converted across to the legal market and all these markets opened up, this would be the addressable market, when we all know that's not really going to happen anytime soon. Obviously overly aggressive timing. Yep, we're going to be built out and our first checks are coming in the door in Q2, when we all know that it's going to be Q4 or the next year because of the way that Infarmed in Portugal does its licensing, or the way that the time it takes to build out these facilities and get them calibrated, and then do your first test crops, and on we go. Hockey stick revenue projections, inflated pricing estimates, you know, use of funds not being addressed. These are some of the things that we quite often see in investor decks that just aren't making a real good pitch for what your business is, how it's different, how you're going to win, and why an investor should put money into your company or want to buy your company. Lack of preparation. You know, most parties entering the M&A arena are ill prepared. You know, we see data rooms, they're obviously very essential, but sometimes they're not well designed and populated. Most parties in cannabis M&A deals underestimate the time that's needed to close. So again, doing that preparation at the beginning, getting yourself ready for M&A, so getting the data room prepared, getting the financials prepared, getting your head around what you're selling, who the ideal investor is, that's going to make you stand out and make you address investors and buyers a lot better. If you are not prepared and haven't put that work in and you're scrambling, it shows. And again, all that's going to do is diminish the value of your business. Due diligence is a term that we hear quite a lot. Obviously, there's a lot of importance in focusing on due diligence. So there's different forms of due diligence that gather around the M&A and cannabis investment kind of process. Due diligence by acquirers or investors. This is due diligence conducted by them that now is far more probing than it ever was. I was around back in 2016 to 2019 when the Canadian licensed producers you know, attracted schwacks of capital that wasn't that discerning. It was a flimsy deck and of some promises and addressable market and this and that, and tens of millions changed hands. Those days are long gone. And unfortunately, the global markets have learned from what's happened around in these other pockets of cannabis legalization. And investors today and buyers today are much, much more savvy. They will dig a lot deeper. They will question you on your assumptions. So preparing a fulsome data room and planning ahead can alleviate a lot of pain. But there's also due diligence that people who are selling or looking for investment, they have to do on the acquirer and the investors. Sellers and parties seeking investment have to make sure that they're doing that due diligence. One thing we've seen quite a bit of actually in the cannabis sector is people, you know, doing competitive intelligence gathering under the guise of being an interested party for M&A or for investment. So they'll come knocking on your door. Yeah, I'm interested. I've heard that you're looking for an investor or you're selling your business. You know, I want to have a chat to you about it. They'll get access to your data room and they never had the intention of buying. So there are ways to do due diligence to make sure that the party that's come forward to you isn't going to waste your time, right? Do they have funds? What are their aspirations? When you go through a matrix of questions to ask these people very often it will come out that they're not a serious buyer, not a serious investor, and you ought not to be, even with an NDA, you ought not to be opening up the kimono, so to speak, to folks that aren't pre-qualified. There's also, frankly, due diligence on M&A brokers and advisors like myself and other folks that do this, investment bankers and other groups. How well do they understand the market? Do they work in the cannabis space, or are they kind of doing this part-time? How many deals have they closed in these different markets around the world? And what kind of network of contacts do they have? We were involved in a project recently where quite a well-known investment bank had come in to put an opportunity out on the M&A side, and they reached out to 80 contacts, which sounds like a big number, and the client was pretty happy until nothing happened. And when we received the list of, I'm not going to mention names, I wouldn't do that, but when we received the list of 80 contacts, it was just a mailing list. Half of the companies on there were in financial trouble. They're not going to buy anything on the market. 10 of them were going out of business. So an old stale mailing list that you just hit every time you have a cannabis M&A isn't the way to do it. It's a moving target, which is why I see Lisa wherever I go on these global cannabis conferences, and many of you I've seen before, because we go out to these places and we shake the hands and we talk to people and go on site visits and really understand what's happening out there and how we need to work to get these M&As moving. One of the things that is very often missed out, a lot of focus in M&A on closing the deal. And it's really, really hard in cannabis right now to close these deals. And, we've had it go right. We've actually, frankly, had a deal close and then somebody didn't pay and got sued, but it actually didn't go through even after the contracts were signed. So it's never over until it's over. But too often what I see in the cannabis sector is that once the deal's been done, there's a sigh of relief and people get back to doing what they're doing, and the integration of this new company is kind of left almost as an afterthought. It's not something that in other industries like pharma, for example, and many other industries, there's a lot of attention, as there should be, to how do we integrate this business. The whole idea of doing this M&A was 1 + 1 = 3. I've got my business, I'm going to buy that business, and together we're going to get more than double. I'm going to make more. I'm going to, in cost savings, in amplification of revenues, etc. So the worst thing you can do is take your foot off the gas when it comes to the integration. So obviously I can literally count on one hand the good integrations that we've seen in cannabis. There have been hundreds and hundreds of deals done. I am thinking of two that happened that I'm aware of in the last 3 or 4 years that took about 18 months to go through. One of them was discussed at a conference. We were in Toronto. I'm happy to share it because it's public knowledge. It was a company called MTL Cannabis, one of the most profitable LPs in Canada, that bought Canada House, a public cannabis company with 2 facilities. And it's a good friend of mine, Michael Perron, is the CEO, and I was trying to get him into other M&As, because when you see somebody buying as a broker, you want them to buy more stuff, right? So Michael said, David, come back to me in 18 months or about at least a year. We have integration work to do. And I was immediately impressed and like, wow, this guy's really got his head screwed on. It was a little sad for us economically, but they've now completed that. So I'll be chasing him up definitely when I get back to Canada. But it just goes to show that it takes time to do that properly. But if you do that integration properly, there's so much benefit to be had from M&A. When you look at the human capital perspective, when you look at the cost savings, there's often tax write-offs that can become part of this. There's a myriad benefits of doing M&A deals in cannabis. But again, spending the time to map out the integration, like there are consultants in other industries, and that's their job. They are, M&A integrators, so to speak, and you go to them, and they're the experts at change management or integration, and they're going to walk you through from beginning to end. There's a whole process and spreadsheets and God knows what Gantt charts and you name it. Right, but that's not the way in cannabis. It's so often that I see that it's just left to the side. So a few thoughts. I've got a couple of minutes left on do's and don'ts. And then I'm happy again. I think there's going to be a round table later. I'll be around for that. And I'm around for a couple of days. And I'm always happy to discuss any M&A subject with any of you. So it'll be my pleasure to chat later as well. A few do's. Obviously, preparing well ahead of time. Timing is everything in M&A. Setting the realistic valuation. Investor deck, make it attractive, defensible, and a solid value proposition. Why are you different? Why should they invest in or buy your business? Take advantage of positive developments such as CanG, MedCanG, US rescheduling. These are things that we need to point to and use to push forward our M&A. Investors are far more sophisticated today. They will dive deeper. They'll scratch under the surface. So you've got to do your due diligence going in and make realistic projections. Do your own due diligence on potential buyers, merger partners. And look, be prepared for 1 or 2 failed attempts, because at the end of the day, it's hard to get the right deal done. Don'ts. Don't wait until you're short of cash to embark on M&A. I see it all the time. And it's the worst thing you can do, because like I said, they'll sniff it out every time. Don't underestimate the time and effort it will take to prepare for M&A and get a deal over the finish line. It is a long and arduous process, more akin to a marathon than a sprint. Don't exaggerate projections in your investor deck. Everyone does it. I might do it a little bit, but do it a little bit where you're doing it in the spirit of best positioning your business. Don't do it in a way that is out of line with reality and is clearly not defensible to any savvy investor. Be careful retaining professional advisors without performing your own due diligence. Don't rely on the deal announcement to bump your market image or stock price. Remember back in the old days, Canopy Growth announced, we bought a plant in Lesotho, and suddenly the stock price, dove up here, and we all know that Lesotho site they spent 30 million on was sold for a couple of million, and it's God knows what it's doing these days. So announcements used to be great for stock price and market image. They're not anymore. Look around at the Pubcos, Curaleaf, the Samais, and those guys who are doing good things, by the way. But when you look at what they've done recently in the announcements, it doesn't do a lot for the stock price. It's performance and it's good business decisions that's going to move the needle on stock price. Last one, don't overlook the importance of integration. We talked about that. I think that's probably the biggest item that I would say that I see missing in cannabis. My deck here goes into a little bit more about us and what we do. I'm not going to touch on that because I'm out of time, but I will leave this. This is with the event organizers. It's also, I'll send it to you if you want a PDF of it. Please let me know. And I really appreciate your time and attention, guys. Thank you so much.